Good morning, Dr. Hill.
Good morning, Dr. Hill.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry. I like to keep myself on mute until I start class so that you guys don't have to hear. Like, can you guys hear that ding? Yeah, that's why I like to keep myself on mute until the class starts so you guys don't have to hear all that. Okay, so today we're going to pick up where we left off. Just as a reminder, Jeopardy starts back this week, well, technically next week. So let's quickly go through who's playing Jeopardy this week. All right, let's see. So we're going to have Olivia. Where's Olivia? Is she in here? There she is. Olivia, Stephen, you're playing. Colton, where's Colton? There's Colton. Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. And I think we have to have 4 people play. I did the math, but I did it a while ago, so that we can make sure everybody has a chance to play and that we have enough quizzes for the semifinals and the finals. So we'll have Olivia, Stephen, Colton, and Justin Perez. There you are. You 4 will be playing on Tuesday. So make sure that you're on time for class and do not take your quiz on Thursday. So Olivia, Stephen, Colton, Justin, you 3 don't take your quiz today. And on Tuesday morning, you'll take it live. So I'm going to send an email to everybody or those 4 to remind you guys that you'll be playing as well. Okay, so just another quick reminder, your policy brief is due in less than a month at this point. So I definitely recommend scheduling more appointments with me to have me help you work on it and to check your progress. We have 1 more week of policy brief workshops where you're required to do a one-on-one meeting with me, but I highly recommend scheduling more than one more meeting. That way we can make sure that your policy implications are done, and then another meeting to make sure that the rest of the format is done properly. So those of you that have already scheduled multiple meetings with me, sounds good. Also, thank you for being so flexible when my son is there. Multiple students had to do something while I ran out to change a diaper, or I had to mute myself while he was screaming, or had to watch me feed him, so on and so forth. So thank you for being patient with little baby Maximus. Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off. Let me share my screen. Okay, can we all see the PowerPoint? Everybody sees that? Okay, good. Let me just adjust this so I can see all of your faces. Okay, there we go. All right. So just a quick overview of what we talked about on Tuesday. We went through the different types of intermediate sanctions that we have today. Alternative sanctions, community corrections, they all mean the same thing. We talked about their purposes. Then we talked about supervision effects. Who remembers what a supervision effect is? Stephen?
A supervision effect is when someone is on probation and they have more like frequent meetings with their parole officer. They are more likely to mess up and therefore wind up going back to either prison or jail.
Very good. The only correction I would make is that when they're on intensive supervision probation compared to regular probation, or intensive supervision parole compared to regular parole. So that's what that is. That just means it's hard for us to determine if the program is working or making them worse, or it's just hard to tell because of that supervision effect. Then we talked about the different ways you can use intensive supervision programs. Front end would be traditional probation, but hyped up with an ISP. Probation enhancement, meaning you start out on routine probation, and if you keep messing up, they bump you up to intensive supervision. Or back end, meaning you come out of prison on an intensive supervision parole program. Then we talked about electronic monitoring and home confinement. We saw that either there are no statistically significant differences between that and traditional probation, but for certain subsets of offenders, we do find reductions in recidivism, specifically sex offenders, which we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. All right, so today we're going to talk about sort of the new hot thing in corrections when it comes to intermediate sanctions. So these are what we refer to as either problem-solving justice courts or diversion courts. So if you hear someone say that they're being diverted, what that means is that we're going to divert you out of the traditional criminal justice system and into a different subset here. So what we have, we're going to talk about a veterans treatment court, and we're also going to talk about a prostitution treatment court. These are very similar to mental health courts or drug courts. They're even kicking around some ideas about reentry courts. So this is all about the problem-solving justice movement. So it includes about 3,000 courts across the US, and it's now spread internationally. And so what we're saying here, the problem-solving justice idea hypothesizes that there are certain types of offenders that keep cycling through the criminal justice system. We usually refer to that as the revolving door of justice. And the reason they keep cycling through is because the traditional criminal justice system isn't addressing the root of the problem. So for instance, if you have someone that's highly addicted to drugs that is burglarizing homes or robbing people to feed their habit, sending them to jail or to prison is not going to solve that. As soon as they get out, they're going to get back on drugs and they're going to continue the cycle. So judges got really tired of seeing the same defendants cycling through the criminal justice system because throwing them in prison and jail wasn't solving the problem. And even if they can get drug treatment in jail, which we're going to talk about next week, it's always better to be treated in the community. The services are better, and you're not surrounded by a group of people that are criminals. So we can do our best by treating you in jail, but we're always going to do better if we can have you in the community. So problem-solving justice is based on this sort of hybrid response to defendants that combine traditional punitive approaches with more therapeutic models. So like I said, these are in part a response to what has been seen as these ineffective revolving door justice with specific types of offenders or specific types of crimes. So problem-solving justice hypothesizes that participants in these programs are going to be more responsive to interventions and less likely to reoffend than defendants who are processed through traditional criminal justice trajectories. And what we're hoping to do here is to help these defendants seek long-term coping strategies. So we're trying to get you treatment and be able to keep you from constantly coming back through the criminal justice system, as opposed to just putting you in an incarcerated setting. So the need for a veterans treatment court is pretty high. This is an important step to reduce the number of veterans that are currently in our criminal justice system. So preliminary data shows that between 2011 and 2012, there were about 14,000 veterans seen across our nation's prisons, jails, or working their way through the court system. And what we see is that the majority of these veterans are actually from the Vietnam War and the Cold War. Only about 15% of the veterans in our criminal justice system are from our more recent wars, the Afghanistan and the Iraq wars. And so while there are commonalities in the experiences of these older veterans and the younger veterans, what we're seeing is that the younger veterans seem to be coming back with more problems. And a lot of researchers think this has to do from improvements in battlefield medicine. So whereas the Vietnam and the Cold War vets may have died on the battlefield, these veterans are coming home because of improvements from these battlefield medicines. So what we're seeing is more veterans with traumatic brain injuries, as well as really life-altering deformities that just make it really hard to cope when they come back. So since only 15% of our veterans in the criminal justice system are some of these younger vets, we're expecting to see an influx of these younger vets coming in contact with the criminal justice system, especially because we've seen higher survival rates and they come home with more instances of traumatic brain injuries and traumatic deformities. We're also seeing a lot higher percentage of them coming home with not only traumatic brain injuries, but head and neck injuries as well. So veterans returning home from a combat zone experience an array of post-deployment adjustments, even if they don't have a traumatic brain injury or PTSD or some sort of life-altering deformity. So as a result, they're at an increased risk of engaging in unsafe behaviors, things like reckless driving, heavy drinking, drug use, or any other sort of risky behavior. And they often have a sense of invincibility. And if ignored, these tendencies can lead to negative consequences for the veteran at home and also in a work setting. And although generally veterans are law-abiding citizens, their post-deployment behavior leads some of them to run afoul of the law and straight into the criminal justice system. So the Veterans Treatment Court represents a mechanism for combat veterans who become involved in the criminal justice system to engage in a system that is less punitive or less focusing on punishment and harshness and more focusing on therapy in a way to help these guys develop long-term coping behaviors without the stigma of having a criminal record. Moreover, these courts recognize the role that combat stress plays, as well as related disorders, as a source of behavior that leads them straight into the criminal justice system. So, for specified low-level offenses, Veteran Treatment Court allows diversion from incarceration to community probation with veteran-specific treatment interventions. So generally, Veterans Treatment Courts are a derivative or a combination of sort of like a mental health court and a substance abuse court. And the emphasis here is on treatment rather than punitive or harsh punishments. So just like we talked about earlier in the week, there's a lot of variation in the way these courts are implemented. So just starting with the type of crime that you were arrested for. So we see wide variability about who is allowed into these courts. So some allow violent felonies. A really small proportion of them allow that. Others do not. Some require a nexus between the military service and their crime. Some are only for combat veterans. Others allow veterans regardless of combat status. Some of them are pre-conviction, meaning they will allow you to be diverted out before your trial actually starts. Others make you actually plead guilty. And what happens then is that you plead guilty to this crime, then you go through the Veterans Treatment Court. And if you successfully complete it, then you can have your charges expunged. Other pre-conviction says, what we'll do is, if you've ever heard the phrase adjudication withheld, what that means is that they're going to let you be diverted out of the criminal justice system before you stand up and get convicted or go to trial for this crime. And if you can complete this treatment, then what they're going to do is drop the charges or dismiss them. They're going to withhold that adjudication. Adjudication means you're actually being tried for this crime. So we see a lot of variability in how these courts are implemented, who is eligible, as well as the services that they offer. All of these courts, though, require that the veteran have some sort of mental health problem, but it has to be broadly defined, and it usually encompasses substance abuse or any other sort of psychiatric condition. So we have a veterans treatment court here in Charleston County. It's about 1.5 to 2 years old. And I was actually given the opportunity to go watch this veterans treatment court twice. It used to be open to the public pre-COVID. Basically, if you're interested in going, we'll probably have to wait for COVID to die down. But if you are interested in witnessing this, let me know and I can put you in touch with the judge who runs this docket. And he's usually very open to having students come in and sit and observe this process. But it's really interesting. And I'll be able to pepper in some examples that I saw from our veterans treatment court here in Charleston County. So right here on the slide where it says it's a collaborative justice model, that is a twofold meaning. The first part when I refer to a collaborative justice model, I mean it's not the traditional adversarial system. So the traditional adversarial system is the prosecutor versus the defense attorney with the judge as the mediator. In this instance, what you have is the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, a representative from the VA, a representative from mental health and substance abuse in the community, as well as usually a couple of nonprofits. They all come together to try to help these veterans stay out of the criminal justice system. So the way our court works here in Charleston County is that there's about an hour-long meeting before the weekly court date where the veterans come in and have their sort of progress report in front of the judge. So all these people come together and myself and another student got to sit in on this process. And it was really fascinating to watch all these people come together to figure out how to help the veterans that they had going through the court successfully be discharged from this program. So what they had was a printout about each of the veterans that were due in court that day. And they had all kinds of information about them, how well they were doing with their treatment, if they weren't doing so well. And then the ones that weren't doing so well, they had like a 20-30 minute discussion about what to do to help this person. So for instance, there was an elderly gentleman who was a veteran from the Vietnam War, and he was addicted to heroin and was burglarizing homes, which is how he got involved in the Veterans Treatment Court. And he had apparently missed the last couple of weeks of his, I forget the name of the shot, but there's a specific shot that you can get that curbs your craving for heroin. And so he had missed his appointment to get those shots, which was a violation of his release, of his conditions of release. So since he missed so many of them, they said that they needed to punish him, but they didn't want to throw him back in jail for the remainder of his sentence, which is generally how traditional probation works. If you hit too many technical violations, that's it, you're kicked off probation, you serve the rest of your sentence in a jail. But that's the opposite of what they want to do here because it's a therapeutic model. So they all sort of put in their 2 cents. And what they decided was that they were going to make this man spend the night in jail. And then they made special accommodations for a nurse from the VA to meet him in the lobby of the jail the morning he was released to give him the shot that he needed. They even went as far as figuring out what to do with this man's bike because he was homeless and he didn't have a car. He just had a bike and they knew that he biked to the court date every week. So they made special accommodations to make sure that his bike was transported to the jail with him and that it would be waiting for him when he got released from the jail that morning. So that's what I mean by the collaborative justice model. Everybody comes together to try to figure out the best way to help this man. The other reason that it's collaborative is because we are relying on services in the community. So if you were to set up your own veterans treatment court in your own county, you have to reach out to the VA. You have to reach out to private and public mental health treatment centers and substance abuse centers and be able to sort of save bed space or time with their therapist for these clients. So another thing that's unique about these courts is that they really focus on veteran identity and they use what they refer to as veteran mentors. So every veteran that goes through the Veterans Treatment Court is paired with a mentor in the community that is also a veteran. that can help them. So this is sort of like a sponsor, if you've heard of those with people with drugs and alcohol addiction issues, but it's more than that. It's just helping them cope with the symptoms of coming home from war. So they can help them with anything with, if this person feels like they're going to relapse, or if they just need someone to talk to, or they're having trouble filling out a housing application, the veteran mentors can help them through this process. And they also usually accompany them to the court date. And so the man, this man was so adorable, by the way. He was the sweetest old man, came with his mentor, and he was explaining, another issue too was that he hadn't done, I'm confused. There were a couple of guys that went through. Another guy got violated because he wasn't doing any heroin, but he was getting really drunk and shouting at pedestrians on the street. And so his veteran mentor was like, yeah, he's been doing great. He hasn't been doing heroin. And the judge was like, but you've been drinking. You're not supposed to be drinking. So the veteran mentors come with them, and they often will sort of plead their case for the veteran. Another veteran was having trouble getting to a job interview. So the veteran mentors are a unique part of this program. Hold on, I see I've got a chat. Are the mentors volunteers? Or are they veterans? They are volunteers, and they're actually really hurting for volunteers if you're interested in volunteering. The only concern, I don't know if you guys know who AJ Pasco is. He's like another a veteran student. The judge was really pushing for him to be a mentor as well. It's time consuming because these guys need a lot of help. So if you have some time on your hands, this is a great way to give back, but it is very time consuming. So if you're interested, let me know and I can put you in contact. At the very least, maybe you could just chat with the judge and see what he has to say about that. But they're definitely, they need help. They don't have enough mentors for the veterans that go through the court. So if you guys know anybody that's a veteran that would be interested in giving back in this way, the one in Charleston County needs volunteers. Okay, so one unique problem that we have that we started to see, there's a little bit of research about these courts popping up. Those of you that are using this as a topic for your policy brief know that there's not a whole lot of research about it, but it is starting to become more commonplace. So one of the unique problems that we've been seeing is the presence of rural veterans. Like a lot of them live way outside the city center and either have trouble finding a ride, getting into town to go to their appointments or their therapeutic sessions, or even to their weekly court date. Or maybe they do have a vehicle, but they have trouble driving it because of some sort of horrible deformity. So a lot of them live out in the middle of nowhere and have a lot of trouble getting into town. So they've started implementing webcam access. This was pre-COVID, so it wasn't as common as it is now. These courts have been around for about 10 years or so. But they're not nearly widespread, even though they've been around for about 10 years, they're really slow in gaining speed. So there aren't that many of them, but they've been starting to implement webcam access over the last 5 years or so for those rural veterans that have a lot of trouble coming into town every week. So there are quite a few studies about these courts, like what they are and how they're implemented. There aren't that many studies on the recidivism rates. There are a few, but like I said, it takes a really long time to get a good recidivism study because we have to have enough participants that have gone through this court and been out of the court for like 3 to 5 years. And we want to have a fairly large sample size of people that went through the court and a sample size of people that were similar that didn't go through the court. So really good recidivism studies take a really long time. So there are about I would say like 3 to 4, maybe recidivism studies. There's like a fourth and a fifth one that aren't so great. But there are a couple good ones. And they have shown that either the courts lead to lower recidivism rates, the people that go through the courts have lower recidivism rates, or in some instances, what they're finding is no effect whatsoever. But there just isn't enough research for us to know specifically like this court will always work, or it only works for these types of people, or it only works under these circumstances. But preliminary research is showing that it is reducing recidivism. All right, questions about the veterans? No questions? All right, let's talk about prostitutes. So another interesting court that has been popping up, this isn't nearly as popular as the veteran treatment courts, are specialized prostitution courts. So the first one of the first ones actually started in Baltimore. And the way it started was a pretty interesting story. So if anybody's from Baltimore, there's one area in Baltimore on the east side where all the prostitutes hang out, or where most of the prostitutes hang out. And the people that lived in that area were getting really tired of seeing the same prostitutes on the street corner every single day. And here's what happened. So in Maryland, if you are arrested for prostitution, it's a $500 fine. If you can't pay that fine, then you go to jail for up to a year. So how do you think these women are making $500? We all know exactly how they're making their $500. So the police would come, they would arrest them, they would get out on bail, and then they would have to make $500 to be able to make this charge go away because they don't want to go to jail. So they would go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. And the residents in those areas said, we are tired of seeing the police come and sweep the streets, and then the next day, the exact same women are right out there doing the same thing again. So they said, there's got to be a better way. So sort of the same idea with the Veterans Treatment Court. Just arresting a prostitute isn't solving the problem. That's not addressing why she's prostituting herself or himself. We'll see that about, there are very few, but there are female prostitutes that went through this court. So it's kind of the same idea here. Baltimore City developed this specialized prostitution court because the citizens were complaining, the residents in that area were complaining. So under the specialized prostitution court, all prostitution defendants are routed to a single early resolution docket in the city's East Side District. And the program began enrolling participants in September of 2009, and they're able to treat 80 participants at a time. So for this particular court, the eligibility criteria says that you have to be charged with prostitution first, but you can't have any prior violent felonies, and you can't currently be on probation or parole. So if you fit that requirement, then what they do is they give you a pitch and they say, hey, would you like to be in this program? If you agree to be in this program, you don't have to go to jail today. So we'll see in a minute, but that's a big reason why a lot of the women agreed to this program. So they said, if you agree to this program, you don't have to go to jail today. And so then the ones that agreed to the program, if there was room, they are removed from the traditional courtroom before they plead guilty to this crime, and they're given a court date 90 days from then. And then what they do is they meet with a caseworker who basically they just discuss the reasons why they're on the street. So they have to give them basically a list of grievances, right? Like, I'm addicted to this drug, I'm homeless, my kids are in foster care, I don't have an education, I have mental health problems, I have health problems. Whatever issues they have then become the conditions of their release, right? So if they have a co-occurring disorder, which is something we're going to learn about next week, which means they have a mental health problem and a substance abuse, then you have to get mental health treatment and drug treatment, and those are your conditions of release, right? If you don't have a GED or you don't have any skills besides prostituting yourself, maybe getting a vocational education or getting your GED, that also becomes conditions of your release. If you need help getting a social security card or need help finding a house, your social worker can help you with that. So you meet once a week with your social worker or your case manager to sort of check on your progress. And just like the Veterans Treatment Court, this is a collaborative process, and the point here is to keep you out of an incarcerated setting. So if you have any problems, you're going to meet with your caseworker who's going to help you with that. So there's been a couple of studies on this, but the biggest study on this program was a qualitative study, meaning it wasn't like a bunch of numbers. It was just interviews and observations. And the interviews actually yielded quite a few interesting things that we can use for policy implications for this week's quiz. So the first question, or the first finding that they figured out was, who are these people? So it was 90% female, 9% transgender, and 1% male. And there were really interesting findings about the differences between those genders that if you're interested, I can point you to this particular study. The average age of the participant was 34. You don't have to write down all these stats. I'm just giving you an understanding of who these people were. 61% of them didn't have a high school degree or a GED. 28% of them had a high school degree, and actually 11% of them had some college education. So those are, that could be a study in and of itself. Like, who are these people that had college educations that were winding up on the street? They had an average of 1.3 minor kids, and about 56% of them had children that were living with them. 13% of them were homeless. And when we go through the self-identified problems, the two big ones, or the three big ones, 48% of them had health problems. They weren't regularly seeing a doctor. 64% of them had substance abuse problems, and 59% of them had mental health problems. About 31% of them were bipolar, and about 14% were depressed. So here's where the findings get really interesting. So when asked about when they were offered the program, most of them accepted it right away. 6% rejected it outright. And when asked why they participated, the two big reasons why, one was that they were afraid of jail and they didn't want to go to jail that day. And the second one was that most of these women and a few of the men had lengthy criminal justice records, criminal records. They'd been arrested for multiple things. They'd been on probation multiple times, and they didn't find the traditional criminal justice system to be helpful. So they were really drawn to this program because of its opposition to the traditional criminal justice process. So the way that you would turn these two findings into a policy implication, if you were interested in starting a similar court in your area, the first thing you want to make sure that you do is that anybody that accepts or accepts this particular being involved in this court doesn't have to go to jail that day, because that is the main reason why these women accepted this program. So to be able to make sure that you're actually getting people to be accepted, that should be a part of your implementation, that anyone that accepts doesn't have to go to jail that day. And also to make sure that it's very clear when you give this pitch how opposed that this program is to the traditional criminal justice system. Really harp on the services that can be offered, how we're not going to send you back to jail for minor technical violations. We're going to do our best to keep you in treatment. Make sure that you've got caseworkers that are very compassionate. Those were things that they really liked. So some of the implications that they talk about here. So this fear of consequences, that's what I mean by making sure that if you let them know that they're not going to jail that day. So that was a powerful motivator to move them into this program. The other thing that was really important to these women was the responsive and compassionate service providers. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about this specific population, you're talking about drug addicted prostitutes with a lot of mental health issues, and a lot of them are homeless. That's not a population that is used to being treated with dignity and compassion. So the fact that they had social workers that were treating them with compassion treating them with dignity, not acting like they were a disgusting piece of trash. That was really important to them. And I think that goes in conjunction with this idea of this opposition to the traditional criminal justice process. So the social workers and the case managers were really, really important to these women. And some of them indicated that just having someone to talk to that gave a shit about them was more important than the services itself. And this woman right here, Blue, who was 36, was quoted as saying, "They'll work with you, you know what I mean? I feel that if I had a slip up and I did something, I could go to my social worker and say, look, I messed up. I need more help. Can you get me help instead of putting me in jail?" And I get that she knows that we're human, we're frightened, and addiction slip ups happen. And next week, when we talk about drugs, you're going to see this theme repeated again. Anybody that has worked with substance abuse addicts or knows someone that's been addicted to drugs or alcohol knows that relapse is a part of treatment. It's highly unlikely that anybody that has a severe addiction is able to quit cold turkey without any relapse. And that's something that these women really, really liked, is that when they did slip up and they did relapse, they were able to be honest about it and get more help instead of being sent to jail. Traditionally, if you are on probation or parole and you're a drug addict and you slip up, that's a technical violation, too many technical violations, and you're back in the slammer where you're not going to get any help. So this was in opposition to the traditional criminal justice system, where if you're having slip ups, that means you have a more severe problem, not to throw you back in jail. We're going to get you treatment. The other implication about this, and we saw this when we went through the types of, or the prevalence of the problems that this population had, that there was a dire and ongoing need for material assistance. There's a reason that these people were on the streets. They had a lot of problems. So this is exactly why throwing them in a jail cell is not going to make a difference. If you are somebody that has bipolar disorder and you are addicted to crack cocaine and you don't have a place to live, throwing you in jail for a year is not going to solve this problem. All right, so the effectiveness of these courts. There are not a whole lot of studies about them because they're not as widespread as the Veterans Treatment Courts. But there are two notable studies. The first one in 2006 showed that those people that went through a prostitution court were less likely to be in a jail cell compared to the ones that were not. And the Rose Sipowicz and colleagues in 2011 showed that those who complete the program were significantly less likely to recidivate or commit another crime for prostitution-related offenses. So it does seem that this program is able to be very helpful. All right, questions about the prostitutes before we sort of wrap it up? Okay. So what we've learned this week, there's a large body of research, including random assignment studies, that consistently shows that the failure of these intensive supervision programs to lower recidivism rates, restraining offenders in the community by increasing surveillance and control over their activities does not reduce criminal activities. In general, the program participants seem to recidivate as often as their counterparts that receive less surveillance. And this surveillance is probably increasing the probability of detection, resulting in more technical violations. So those are our supervision effects that we're seeing here. What we can take from this is that most of the knowledge, most of this research has focused on the restraining aspects, that surveillance and control of these community programs, and not the treatment that is provided. The one time that the treatment was included in a study on an ISP it found that that aspect had the ability to improve recidivism among the offenders involved. And if you think about it this way, so an easy way to increase surveillance and control on an offender is to give them weekly drug tests, right? So if you're giving them weekly drug tests, but you're not actually giving them treatment, how are you actually solving the drug problem? So it makes more sense that if you're gonna give them weekly drug tests, at the very least, you should be giving them access to treatment as well. So maybe the key here is to turn towards this problem-solving justice to try to divert offenders out of the criminal justice system. So right now we're incarcerating way too many people. And once you get swept up in the criminal justice system, like we learned last week, it's really hard to get your life back. So the bottom line is that people are involved in crime for a lot of reasons, and we shouldn't just be blindly incarcerating people. We should be trying to actually solve the problem. And so the problem-solving justice movement, I think, is kind of the new step that our criminal justice system is taking. Instead of just blindly incarcerating people, putting them out on the streets and then watching them really closely without giving them access to treatment really isn't solving the problem. So the whole nation is kind of moving towards this problem-solving justice court. And you can see that in all of these courts popping up. Like I said, Charleston County got a veterans treatment court about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So this is sort of the new thing in corrections, that it's taking a really long time for the legislative branch to make sentencing reform changes. So in the interim, a lot of cities and states are sort of taking this problem head on and implementing these courts themselves. All right, questions about this stuff? No questions. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, Olivia, Stephen, Colton, and Justin, you do not take your quiz today. Everybody else, your quiz is available starting at 10:45 this morning. You have until 10:45 tomorrow morning to take your quiz. It's just like the prior 5 quizzes. You're going to need Respondus Lockdown Browser. You've got 30 minutes once you start it. And then on Tuesday morning, we'll have Olivia, Stephen, Colton, and Justin take their quiz live for Jeopardy. Send me an email if you want to make one-on-one Zoom appointments for your policy brief. And again, thank you guys for being patient and flexible. Evan, who is that behind you? I can't see. Oh, hey, Chase. Chase, you should help Evan with his policy brief. Chase did lots of one-on-one appointments with me for his policy brief. But thank you for being patient and flexible while my baby was there. Hi, Chase.
I mean, I can't help this dumbass.
It's not very nice. This session is being recorded for people that missed the class or had connectivity problems. Really glad you added that in. Okay, well, we'll end on that. Lovely to see you all. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Shoot me an email if you want a one-on-one Zoom session. And Jackie, I'm going to send you another link so that our whole internship discussion isn't caught on this recording. So stand by. I'll send you one right now. See you guys later.